this is a movie that just as a comic book fan, like a comic book reader, this type of movie is what you at one time would dream about. You would this is what you would hear spoken about in comic book shops. Low budget, boiled down, comic book accurate, staying true to the source material, nailing the tone, some special effects, but somewhat of an epic story told in very confined ways. And this is Hellboy the Crooked Man. We've been talking about Hellboy a lot recently on this podcast. So guys, welcome. Peter A. DeLuca here, AKAPAD. I am your film buff, obsessively bringing you every single film ever made. That's the mission statement of this show. This movie came out in 2024. It's got a $20 million budget. The box office, according to Wikipedia, is $2 million. So we gotta talk about it. Let's go.
Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
So let's just go back in time real quick, my AK. Not long ago on this very show, and again, welcome back to the show of shows. Not long ago, I made the argument, I presented what I still feel are the facts, that Hellboy is a dead, forgotten franchise. Since I dropped that opinion episode, where many of you agreed, thank you so much for the comments on that Hellboy episode. I've done my due diligence. So upcoming, we have the previous Hellboy movie. This is the most recent Hellboy movie. Upcoming, we will discuss the Hellboy animated feature, Sword of Storms, Fist of Iron, I believe, and the Guillermo del Toro Hellboys, Hellboy and Hellboy the Golden Army. I wanted to do a complete scope, a complete view. I'm actually still trying to hunt down other Hellboy animation, but I'm trying to bring you a complete glimpse to reverse engineer one of my contentions, because again, I'd love to be proven wrong. The previous Hellboy film, by the way, guys, I think is underrated goodness. The previous Hellboy movie, which was, let me give you some of that. Excuse me, I didn't have it up. Hellboy 2019, directed by Neil Marshall. This movie, that one, I hate to say it, I loved it. I really did. And everyone trashed at me. I remember a lot of the reviews on that movie. So, yeah, I was proven wrong with how I entered into that viewing. That's an episode coming up. So we're kind of moving forwards and backwards at the same time. We're discussing Hellboy the Crooked Man today because during our daytime drops, we like to do somewhat recent, current movies. I can't do everything in 2025 as 2025 rolls out because there's just not enough. There's just not enough releases. So we gotta do 2024, 2025. But we'll keep it somewhat, and probably it's gonna be like a 5-year period. But either way, I like to bring you guys things that are newer earlier within the day. I just think that's a little bit fair. And then at night we get into older movies and opinions, rock and roll. You guys love those opinions. So I watched this. And the entire time I'm watching it, I'm thinking this is a wonderful love letter. It really is. It's and I didn't realize it's co-written by Mike Mignola. I love his last name. That's the creator of Hellboy. In my world, I call that the co-creator because we have to give credit to a guy named John Byrne. But recently, there was a documentary about him, Drawing Monsters. We discussed that on this channel. But this movie is a love letter. It shows you that we can do these concepts and ideas and this type of superhero action horror with low budget and big budget. It's quite the scale now. We've seen Hollywood's best of the best through and through come out for Hellboy. We've seen Hollywood's elite come back to try and bring Hellboy back, like as a reboot. So we've seen this character get the Hollywood tentpole treatment. We've seen a potential reboot, and we've seen this. And you always want to say we can watch these movies in reverse. We can watch Crooked Man first, then we can watch 2019, and then we can watch the Guillermo del Toro Hellboys, and we see the saga get more and more epic. And I believe that's a fair viewing order, watching the 4 Hellboy live actions in reverse. We've had 3 separate Hellboy directors. We have 3 separate Hellboy portrayals. And what we get here, even through a makeup sense, the visual of Hellboy, we have a boiled down version of the Hellboy makeup. Now, the last movie and this one bother me with how they use the Hand of Doom, because it just seems like that the actor's like lugging it around and doesn't have quite control over the hand. It does take you out of scenes. Some of the blocking for it, you can tell that they favor the moving hand versus the unmoving hand. I think that's a little bit of a nitpick observation, but sometimes we want to be sucked into movies and sucked into characters in subliminal ways, and I feel like this is a subliminal trigger. I think this is on cue with the feeling of the comic book. I love the idea that they made this for $20 million and they just got it done and they got it out the gate. The weird thing to me is that the comic book world, yet again, didn't show up for this movie. And I just recently discussed no one's showing up for science fiction movies anymore. Well, no one's showing up for non-MCU movies. And no one likes the MCU now. At one time, the movie Here that we talked about with Tom Hanks would be championed as a comic book movie. The Electric the Electric State would be championed as a comic book movie. And then we have Hellboy. Hellboy made for a bare bones $20 million. It tells the epic saga of the Crooked Man. Now, I didn't read the comic book. I don't know how accurate this is. I think it's pretty much there, though. It's just sometimes you can feel it as you're watching it. I want to read The Crooked Man because I believe it's drawn by Richard Corbin. He's the one that did the Den sequence in the heavy metal anthology animated movie from 1981, maybe 1982, I believe. We did discuss that on this channel way back, by the way. Good luck scrolling for that. Anything that I make a reference to, you can just hit AKAPAD.com and type it in, and you'll get it. You'll get the full episode. You can listen to it there in your web browser. But this movie does falter from the budgeting. It falters from being a $20 million movie. We don't quite get like a bombastic, almost like celebratory, we defeated the bad guy and the war must continue ending. The Crooked Man as a villain, though, or as a demonic entity, is freaking awesome. Great concept. And yet again, like, this is the draw for Hellboy. But this movie essentially illustrated that there's just no desire for Hellboy anymore. And we see that with the box office numbers. I mean, it's a heartbreaking level of revenue here. 2 million off of 20 million. If there was ever a way to kill a absolute franchise, and guys, I feel like I'm struggling for words a lot in this episode, because there's a lot to discuss with this movie. Like, we can go again, sometimes I'm scatterbrained and there's so many different directions to walk down. I do my very best, but it just seems like the audience has walked away from this film. Brian Taylor is our co-writer director, and I do feel like we have to discuss Brian Taylor, because he's with Mark Neverdeen, a former collaborator of his, they wrote and directed Crank. he directed Pathology. That's a thriller, crime, horror movie that's been on my radar for a little bit of time. They followed up Crank in 2009. So, their career in film started in, as writer-director, started in 2006. They get a sequel. They essentially created a franchise, Crank High Voltage. Then, that same year, 2009, the much underrated Gerard Butler's in a lot of good movies, by the way. Gamer, if you guys remember that. Writer, Jonah Hex. I think that movie deserves way more credit. Director, Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance. Great great action sequences in that. It's every time I watch any of the Ghost Riders, I want to find crevices to discuss. Previously, we did discuss his 2003 movie Biker Boys, where he's a visual effects artist. I think that episode did pretty well. Mom and Dad 2017, we discussed that for the 31 Days of Dread. He is director, writer. That movie, so if you can make Mom and Dad, and it's him with Nicolas Cage again, Selma Blair's in that. That's the one where the basically the parents get this like zombie virus and they have to kill their kids. It's a worldwide epidemic. It's such a nice, delicate, lovely spin on the whole zombie thing. He writes and directs and produces that. So you think, off of the strength of Mom and Dad, Hellboy the Crooked Man pretty much would be perfect for him. That we can do something. And we see that potentially the Hellboy story, like a Hellboy story, it needs a little bit more help. It needs more budget. It needs more effects. I think people have come in a little bit harsh with the special effects in this movie. I think people have come in a little, because I did go through a couple of reviews because I was so curious what other people said. I'm glad to see there's a lot of YouTube love for this movie. That gives me a little bit of hope. But I do feel like some of the shots and the sequences seem a little bit more jittery. It's hard to track character sometimes when things are happening. Namely, there's a church scene that like it takes you, it pulls you more in or it takes you out of the movie. I think it depends on where the audience is at the time, and that clearly could vary. But I think a couple reviewers were a little bit too harsh for that scene. If the story is engaging enough, which it was and it is at this time, like you're there to the next scene. It's like you're just kind of like moving forward. Every single movie, I don't care what it is, has moments where like the mind wanders. But Crooked Man, this movie, I still feel for $20 million, it feels like a Hellboy movie. Just like the last two Hellboy movies to me felt way more like Hellboy than the Guillermo del Toro movies. Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy essentially is Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy. It's not Mike Mignola's. And this also presents the argument: is how close to the source material or the tone do we try and get? Because does the tone of a comic book mean anything when we're making a movie? Like it's their different experiences, and we see this with novel adaptations, which is why so many novel adaptations are so wildly different from the books, and we even see this with historical adaptations. I think there is an idea of letting the filmmakers be filmmakers and let that come first, but I think there's a little bit of this vocal minority that they like to repeat things, and it gets repeated, and it's character, like staying true to the source material, character accuracy, so on and so on and so on. I feel like that does get into the mind of the filmmakers from time to time. And honestly speaking, I would not have Mike Mignola anywhere near a production. Like he's not the filmmaker. And it's okay, like Hellboy's not a complicated character, so it's not like we need someone on set saying yes and no, and my character would never do this, which is a little bit of the sense that we got in Drawing Monsters, that documentary I referred to earlier. So AKAPAD, we're also going to be doing Hellboy the Corpse on my YouTube channel. That is it's a one shot I recently picked up from a used bookstore. So if you go to akapad.com, there sometime soon there will be a Hellboy page, a Hellboy section located under the Hubs tab, potentially even on the homepage slider. So hopefully I can see you there. I can see you on the website. And if you guys want to get a little bit more of a glimpse of the study of this franchise, because we will be getting into the comic book stuff on YouTube, that's where you can find it. And until then, thanks for hanging out. I love you. Rock and roll.
Okay, that's a wrap.